I'm standing in the parking lot of Sacred Heart Church in Millbrook, New York, staring at my phone screen, reading the same text message for the 10th time. My hands are shaking, and I can barely grip my phone. The words blur together through my tears, but I know them by heart now. Mom, I'm sorry, but you can't come to the wedding. It's her day, not yours. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. Those words, they cut deeper than any knife ever could. Because here's the thing that my son Michael doesn't know as he's sending me this message at 9:30 in the morning on what should be the happiest day of our lives. I'm not just reading this text from some distant location, wondering how I'm going to explain to my friends why I won't be at my own son's wedding. No, I'm reading it while standing in the parking lot of the very church where he's getting married in exactly 2.5 hours. My dress is hanging in the back of my car. My hair appointment was at 7 this morning, and I've driven 4 hours from Albany to be here for him. But let me back up, because this story is about so much more than just a wedding invitation that got revoked. It's about family and lies, and the kind of betrayal that makes you question everything you thought you knew about the people you love most. It's about a daughter-in-law who smiled to my face for 2 years while plotting to erase me from my son's life, and it's about discovering that sometimes the person you raised, the child you sacrificed everything for, can become someone you don't recognize. My name is Linda, and if you're new here, I want you to know that sharing these stories isn't easy for me. But I've learned that sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that need to be told, because somewhere out there, someone else is going through the same thing. So if this story resonates with you, or if you've dealt with difficult family dynamics, please hit that subscribe button. It means more to me than you know, and it helps me continue sharing these real, raw stories that so many of us are living through but afraid to talk about. I need to tell you about how this all started, because the wedding text wasn't the beginning. It was just the moment everything finally came crashing down. The real story begins 2 years ago, when Michael first brought Jessica home to meet me. I remember that day so clearly because I was so excited. My son, my only child, was 26 years old and had never brought a girl home before. He'd had relationships, sure, but nothing serious enough to warrant a family introduction. So when he called me that Thursday afternoon and said he wanted to bring someone special over for Sunday dinner, I practically floated around my house for the next 3 days. I cleaned everything twice. I made his favorite pot roast, the one with the little potatoes and carrots that he'd been asking for since he was 12. I even drove to 3 different stores to find the specific brand of dinner rolls he loved as a kid. Looking back now, I realize I was trying too hard. But I was just so happy. After his father left when Michael was 14, it had been just the 2 of us for so long. I'd worked double shifts at the diner to put him through college, and I'd watched him build his career as a marketing manager at a firm in Manhattan. He was doing so well, and I was so proud of him. The idea that he'd found someone to share his life with, it filled a hole in my heart that I didn't even realize was there. Jessica walked into my house that Sunday afternoon, wearing a sundress that probably cost more than I made in a week, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that seemed just a little too bright. She was beautiful. I'll give her that. The kind of beautiful that makes other women feel inadequate without even trying. But more than that, she was polished in a way that made me acutely aware of my own rough edges. While I was wearing my nicest dress from JCPenney, she looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. "Mrs. Martinez," she said, extending her hand with that brilliant smile. "I've heard so much about you. Michael talks about you constantly. I should have been happy to hear that. I should have been thrilled that my son talked about me to his girlfriend. But something in the way she said it, something in the way her eyes didn't quite match her smile, made me pause. It was like she was reciting lines from a script, hitting all the right notes, but missing the genuine emotion behind them. During dinner, she asked all the right questions. She complimented the food, laughed at my stories about Michael's childhood, and seemed genuinely interested in hearing about my work at the diner. She even offered to help with the dishes, though I could tell she was relieved when I declined. Michael was practically glowing, watching her charm his mother, and I tried to push down the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. "Your son is amazing," she told me as we stood in the kitchen while Michael took a phone call outside. "He's so devoted to family. It's actually one of the things I love most about him." The way she said "devoted to family" stuck with me. There was something almost clinical about it, like she was cataloging his traits rather than expressing genuine affection. But I smiled and nodded, because I wanted this to work. I wanted Michael to be happy, and if Jessica made him happy, then I was going to love her too. Over the next few months, I tried so hard to build a relationship with her. I invited them both over for dinner regularly, always making sure to ask about Jessica's preferences and dietary restrictions. I learned that she was lactose intolerant, so I bought special milk for her coffee. I found out she was trying to eat less gluten, so I researched recipes and bought alternative flours. I sent her articles I thought she might find interesting, since she worked in public relations for a nonprofit downtown. I even asked her advice on updating my wardrobe, thinking that maybe we could go shopping together and bond over trying on clothes. But every gesture I made seemed to fall flat. She'd thank me politely for the lactose-free milk, but I never saw her drink it. She'd smile and nod when I'd bring up the articles I'd sent, but I could tell she hadn't read them. When I suggested shopping together, she'd always have some excuse about being busy with work or having plans with her college friends. It was like trying to hug someone who was simultaneously patting you on the back and pushing you away. The real shift happened about 6 months after I first met her. Michael started coming to family dinners alone more often, always with some excuse about Jessica working late or having other commitments. When I'd ask about her, he'd get this tight expression on his face and change the subject. I started to worry that they were having problems, but when I'd try to bring it up, he'd insist everything was fine. "She's just really focused on her career right now, Mom," he'd say. "You know how it is." But I didn't know how it was. I'd never been career-focused in the way Jessica seemed to be. I'd always worked to survive, to pay the bills and keep food on the table. The idea of choosing work over family dinner was foreign to me, and I couldn't understand why someone would want to avoid spending time with the people who cared about them. Then came the phone calls. They started subtly at first. Michael would call less frequently, and when he did, our conversations felt stilted and brief. He used to call me every Sunday morning, a tradition we'd maintained since he moved out for college. We'd talk for an hour or more, catching up on everything from his work to my latest drama with the customers at the diner. But gradually, those calls became every other Sunday, then once a month, then only when I called him first. When I'd ask if everything was okay, he'd assure me it was, but I could hear something different in his voice. There was a distance there that hadn't existed before, a formality that made me feel like I was talking to a stranger, rather than my son. He'd ask about my health and my work, but in the way you might ask a casual acquaintance, not with the genuine interest and affection I was used to. The holiday season that year was when things really started to unravel. Michael and Jessica had been together for about 8 months, and I was expecting them both for Thanksgiving. I'd been planning the menu for weeks, incorporating dishes I thought Jessica would enjoy. I'd even bought a special centerpiece and new napkins, wanting everything to be perfect for what I hoped would become a new family tradition. 2 days before Thanksgiving, Michael called. "Mom, I'm really sorry, but we won't be able to make it for Thanksgiving this year." I felt my heart drop. "What happened? Are you okay?" "We're fine. It's just..." Jessica's parents invited us to their place in Connecticut, and it's important to her that we go. You understand, right? I understood that my son was choosing his girlfriend's family over his own mother for the first time in his life. I understood that the woman I'd been trying so hard to welcome into our family had succeeded in pulling him away from me. But I also understood that fighting it would only push him further away, so I swallowed my hurt and told him I understood. "Of course, honey. Family is important. Maybe we can do something the weekend after?" "Yeah, maybe," he said, but I could tell his heart wasn't in it. That weekend after never came. There was always some excuse, some reason why they couldn't make it. I spent Thanksgiving alone for the first time in my life, eating leftover pot roast and watching football by myself, wondering where I'd gone wrong. Christmas was even worse. Michael and Jessica were going to her parents' house in Connecticut again, and this time they were staying for a week. I got a gift from Michael in the mail, a generic gift card to a department store chain, wrapped in paper that still had the store's price tag on it. It was the kind of gift you buy for someone you barely know, not for the woman who raised you. I called him on Christmas Day, and Jessica answered his phone. "Oh, hi, Mrs. Martinez," she said, her voice bright and cheerful. "Michael's outside building a snowman with my nephew. Isn't that sweet? He's such a natural with kids." The way she said it, like she was painting a picture of a life I wasn't part of, made my stomach turn. "Could you have him call me back when he gets a chance?" "Of course. We've just been so busy with family activities. You know how it is during the holidays." But I didn't know how it was, because I was sitting alone in my apartment, looking at the Christmas tree I'd decorated for no one, waiting for a phone call that never came. The pattern continued for months. Michael would surface occasionally, usually when he needed something, or felt guilty enough to check in, but our relationship had fundamentally changed. The easy intimacy we'd always shared was gone, replaced by polite conversations that felt more like obligation than love. I started to feel like I was grieving the loss of my son while he was still alive, watching him slip away from me one conversation at a time. I tried everything I could think of to bridge the gap. I sent care packages to his apartment, filled with homemade cookies and his favorite snacks. I texted him articles about things I thought he'd find interesting, trying to spark conversations the way we used to. I even started following Jessica on social media, hoping to feel more connected to their life together. That turned out to be a mistake. Jessica's Instagram was a carefully curated collection of their life together, and I wasn't in any of it. There were photos of them at fancy restaurants, on weekend trips to the Hamptons, at gallery openings and wine tastings. There were pictures of her with her parents, her college friends, her co-workers. There were even photos of Michael with her family, looking completely at ease and happy in a way that made my chest ache. But there were no photos of me, no pictures from any of the dinners I'd cooked for them, no shots of Michael and me together, no acknowledgement that I existed in his life at all. It was like she was systematically erasing me from his story, one carefully filtered photo at a time. The engagement announcement came through a Facebook post. Not a phone call, not a visit, not even a text message. I was scrolling through my feed on a Tuesday morning before work when I saw it. A photo of Jessica's left hand, adorned with a diamond ring that probably cost more than I made in 6 months, with the caption, "I said yes to my best friend and the love of my life." I stared at that photo for so long that my coffee got cold. My son was engaged, and I was finding out about it the same way as his high school acquaintances and former co-workers. I sat in my kitchen, still in my work uniform, and cried harder than I had since the day his father left. Michael called me about an hour later, probably after Jessica reminded him that he should probably inform his mother about his engagement before she heard it from someone else. "Mom, I know you probably saw the post, and I wanted to call and—" "Congratulations," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm so happy for you both. Thank you. I know we should have told you first, but everything happened so fast and—" "It's okay, Michael. I understand." But I didn't understand. I didn't understand how the boy who used to tell me everything, who used to call me first with any news, good or bad, had become a man who announced his engagement to the world before telling his own mother. I didn't understand how I'd become such a peripheral figure in his life, that I was getting his major life updates through social media. "We're thinking about having the wedding next fall," he continued. "Nothing too big, just family and close friends." "That sounds lovely," I said, wondering if I qualified as family anymore, or if I'd been relegated to the close friends category. Jessica's parents are helping with the planning. Her mom is really excited about it. Of course she was. Jessica's mother got to be involved in planning her daughter's wedding, got to share in that special experience that mothers and daughters are supposed to have together. I wondered if Jessica's mother knew how lucky she was, or if she took it for granted the way I'd taken Michael's closeness for granted before it was gone. Over the next few months, I caught glimpses of the wedding planning process through social media and the occasional comment Michael would make during our increasingly rare phone calls. There were photos of Jessica and her mother at bridal boutiques, looking at flowers, tasting cakes. There were posts about engagement parties and bridal showers that I wasn't invited to, celebrations of their love that somehow didn't include the woman who'd raised the groom. I kept waiting for Michael to ask me to be involved somehow. I fantasized about him calling to ask my opinion on venues or flowers, or to invite me to go dress shopping with Jessica and her mother. I imagined him asking me to help with the invitations or to share family photos for a slideshow, but those invitations never came. Instead, I got updates the way an acquaintance might. "The wedding planning is going well," or "Jessica found a beautiful dress," or "We finally decided on a venue," always delivered in that polite, distant tone that made me feel like I was receiving a newsletter rather than talking to my son. The wedding invitation arrived in my mailbox on a Tuesday in June, exactly 4 months before the wedding date. It was beautiful, printed on thick cardstock with elegant script, the kind of invitation that cost more per piece than I spent on groceries in a week. My name was written in calligraphy on the inner envelope, Mrs. Linda Martinez, not Mom or Michael's mother or anything that indicated I was more than just another guest. Just my name, written in fancy script, as if I were a distant relative or family friend. I held that invitation in my hands and felt a mixture of relief and heartbreak. Relief, because I was invited, because I hadn't been completely erased from this milestone in my son's life. Heartbreak, because receiving a formal invitation to my own son's wedding felt like the final confirmation that our relationship had fundamentally changed. The wedding was set for October 15th at Sacred Heart Church in Millbrook, with a reception to follow at the Millbrook Country Club. I'd never been to either venue, but I looked them up online and could tell they were expensive, the kind of places where Jessica's family would feel comfortable, and I would feel completely out of place. I immediately called Michael to thank him for the invitation, but he didn't answer. I left a voicemail telling him how beautiful the invitation was and how excited I was to celebrate with them. He texted me back 3 hours later. "Thanks, Mom. Glad you can make it. Glad I could make it." As if my presence at my own son's wedding was optional. As if he wasn't sure whether I'd show up or not. As if I were just another name on their guest list, rather than the woman who'd given him life and raised him and loved him more than anyone else ever could. I started planning for the wedding immediately. I knew I had to be perfect. Knew that everyone would be watching to see how the groom's mother measured up to the bride's family. I bought a new dress, something elegant, but not too flashy, in a color that wouldn't clash with the wedding photos. I made an appointment to get my hair done, booked a hotel room in town so I wouldn't have to drive 4 hours each way, and even bought new shoes that I practiced walking in so I wouldn't stumble during the ceremony. But as the wedding date approached, I started to notice something strange. Michael stopped mentioning the wedding in our conversations entirely. When I'd bring up details about the day or ask questions about logistics, he'd give me terse, one-word answers or change the subject. When I asked about the rehearsal dinner, he told me it was just for the wedding party and immediate family. When I asked about photos, he said they were doing all the formal shots before the ceremony. 2 weeks before the wedding, I called to ask about parking at the church, and Jessica answered Michael's phone. "Oh, hi, Mrs. Martinez," she said, her voice slightly strained. "Michael's in the shower. Can I help you with something? I was just wondering about parking at the church. I want to make sure I get there early enough to find a spot." There was a pause, and I could hear her whispering to someone in the background. Then she came back on the line. "You know, Mrs. Martinez, I think there might be some confusion. The wedding is really small, just immediate family and a few close friends. I thought Michael had talked to you about this." My heart started pounding. "What do you mean?" "I received an invitation." "Well, yes, but look, this is awkward, but maybe you should talk to Michael about this. I don't want to overstep." She hung up before I could respond, leaving me standing in my kitchen, staring at the phone and trying to process what had just happened. I called Michael immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. I left 3 messages that day, each one more desperate than the last, but he didn't call me back. The next morning, I got a text from him. "Mom, I'm sorry you had to hear it from Jessica. We've had to make some changes to the guest list due to budget constraints. I'll call you later to explain." But he didn't call later. He didn't call at all. I sent him text after text, asking for clarification, begging him to explain what was happening. I got one response. "I'm sorry, Mom. This is just how it has to be." I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that my son, the boy I'd raised alone, the child I'd sacrificed everything for, was uninviting me from his wedding. I called my sister in Phoenix, sobbing so hard I could barely speak. "Maria, I don't understand what's happening. He's uninviting me from his own wedding. How is that possible? Have you talked to him directly? Face to face? He won't see me. He won't take my calls. He just sent me a text saying it's how it has to be." "Linda, honey, this doesn't sound like Michael. This sounds like that girl is pulling strings behind the scenes." I knew she was right, but knowing it and being able to do anything about it were 2 different things. I'd watched Jessica systematically isolate Michael from me over the course of 2 years, and now she was completing the process by ensuring I wasn't even present for the most important day of his life. But I couldn't just accept it. I couldn't let her win without a fight. So I made a decision that probably wasn't the wisest thing I'd ever done, but it was the only thing I could think of. I was going to show up anyway. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like I was being dramatic or petty or trying to ruin their day, but you have to understand, this wasn't about the wedding. This was about my son, about the relationship I'd been watching slip away from me piece by piece for 2 years. This was about refusing to be erased from his life without at least trying to remind him who I was and what we'd meant to each other. I didn't plan to cause a scene. I didn't plan to object during the ceremony or make a speech at the reception. I just wanted to be there, to witness this moment in my son's life, to show him that no matter what Jessica had told him about me, I still loved him, and I still wanted to be part of his story. So I stuck to my original plan. I kept my hotel reservation, my hair appointment, my carefully chosen outfit. I told myself that if I showed up and Michael really truly didn't want me there, I would leave quietly. But I had to try. I had to give him the chance to see me and remember who we used to be to each other. The night before the wedding, I lay in my hotel bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering if I was making a terrible mistake. I thought about calling him one more time, about trying to reach out and repair whatever damage had been done. But I knew that Jessica would intercept any attempt at communication, just like she had been doing for months. I thought about all the milestones I'd already missed because of her manipulation, the engagement party where I wasn't welcome, the bridal shower where I wasn't invited, the rehearsal dinner where I wasn't included. I thought about how I'd been systematically excluded from every moment leading up to this day, and I knew that if I didn't show up now, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. So I got dressed that morning. I did my hair and put on my new dress and drove to Sacred Heart Church, my heart pounding with every mile. I kept telling myself that maybe it would be okay, that maybe seeing me there would remind Michael of how much we'd meant to each other. Maybe he'd realize that whatever Jessica had told him about me, whatever lies she'd fed him about why I couldn't be there, weren't true. I parked in the church parking lot at 9 a.m, 3.5 hours before the ceremony was scheduled to start. I sat in my car, watching early vendors and wedding party members arrive, trying to work up the courage to go inside. I saw Jessica's parents pull up in a sleek black Mercedes, followed by what looked like her college friends in a rented SUV. I saw the florist arrive with arrangements that probably cost more than I made in a month. And then, at 9:30, my phone buzzed with a text message. I looked down and saw Michael's name, and for a moment, my heart leaped. Maybe he was reaching out. Maybe he'd changed his mind. Maybe he wanted to see me after all. But when I read the message, my world collapsed. "Mom, I'm sorry, but you can't come to the wedding. It's her day, not yours. Please don't make this harder than it has to be." I stared at those words, reading them over and over again. It's her day, not yours. As if wanting to witness my son's wedding was somehow selfish. As if my presence would somehow diminish Jessica's moment. As if I were trying to compete with her instead of simply wanting to be part of my son's life. I sat in that parking lot, crying harder than I'd cried since the day his father left us. But this felt worse than divorce, because at least when his father left, I still had Michael. Now I felt like I was losing the only family I had left, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. But then something strange happened. As I sat there, sobbing in my car, I started to get angry, not just sad or hurt, but genuinely angry. I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made for Michael over the years, all the double shifts I'd worked to pay for his college, all the times I'd gone without so he could have what he needed, all the nights I'd stayed up helping him with homework or worrying about his future. I thought about the birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesday evenings we'd spent together, just the two of us against the world. I thought about the way he used to hug me goodbye when I dropped him off at college, and the way he used to call me first when anything good or bad happened in his life. I thought about the son I'd raised, the boy who'd been kind and loving and loyal, and I wondered where that person had gone. And I realized that I wasn't just losing Michael. I was losing myself. I was losing the identity I'd built around being his mother, the purpose that had driven me for 26 years. I was being asked to disappear quietly, to pretend that I didn't matter, to accept that I was no longer welcome in my own son's life. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to leave. I wasn't going to slink away quietly and let Jessica win. I was going to stay right here in this parking lot, and I was going to watch my son get married, even if I had to do it from a distance. I moved my car to a spot where I could see the church entrance clearly, and I waited. I watched as guests began to arrive, elegantly dressed people who looked like they belonged at a country club wedding. I watched as the wedding party showed up, young men in expensive suits and women in designer dresses, all of them laughing and taking selfies on the church steps. And then, at 10:15, I saw him. Michael stepped out of a black sedan, and my breath caught in my throat. He looked so handsome in his tuxedo, so mature and confident. For a moment, he looked exactly like his father had on our wedding day, and I felt a sharp pang of memory and loss. But then, Jessica emerged from the car behind him, and even from a distance, I could see the possessive way she took his arm, the way she seemed to steer him toward the church as if he were a prize she'd won. She was beautiful, I had to admit. Her wedding dress was stunning, probably worth more than I made in 3 months, but there was something cold about her beauty, something calculated that made my skin crawl. I watched them pose for photos on the church steps, surrounded by their wedding party and both sets of parents. I watched Michael smile and laugh, looking genuinely happy in a way I hadn't seen in years, and for a moment, I wondered if I was the problem. Maybe I really was being selfish. Maybe my presence would ruin their perfect day. Maybe I should just leave and let them have their fairy tale wedding without the complication of an unwanted mother-in-law. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Michael kept looking around, scanning the crowd of guests, as if he were looking for someone. And every time he started to look toward the parking lot, toward where I was sitting, Jessica would touch his arm or say something to redirect his attention. It was subtle, but once I noticed it, I couldn't stop seeing it. She knew I was here. Somehow she knew I was here, and she was actively preventing Michael from seeing me. I sat in my car for another hour, watching this elaborate dance play out, watching Jessica manage Michael's attention like a skilled puppeteer, ensuring that he never looked in my direction for too long, watching her parents and friends form a protective circle around them, as if they were shielding them from some kind of threat. And I realized that I wasn't just unwanted at this wedding. I was seen as an enemy. Jessica had somehow convinced everyone, including my own son, that I was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. At 11:30, the guests started filing into the church. I watched couples and families walk up the stone steps, chatting and laughing, excited to witness the union of two people they cared about. I watched Michael's college friends, people I'd fed and housed during their visits home, walk into the church without a second glance toward the parking lot where I sat. And then, at 11:45, I saw something that made my heart stop. Michael broke away from the group and started walking toward the parking lot. He was looking directly at my car, and I could see the conflict on his face even from a distance. He'd seen me. Despite Jessica's best efforts, he'd seen me. I got out of my car and started walking toward him, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. This was it. This was the moment when I'd find out if my son still existed underneath the stranger Jessica had created. "Michael," I called out when I was about 20 feet away. "Michael, wait." He stopped walking and turned to face me fully. Up close, I could see the pain in his eyes, the exhaustion that comes from being pulled in too many directions for too long. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I'm here for your wedding," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm here because I love you, and I want to celebrate with you. I told you not to come. I told you this was how it had to be." "No, Michael. Jessica told me not to come." "You sent me a text message. When was the last time you and I had an actual conversation about anything? When was the last time you made a decision about our relationship without checking with her first?" He looked stricken, and I could see that my words had hit their mark. "Mom, please, don't do this. Not today." "Do what? Love you? Want to be part of your life?" "Michael, I'm your mother. I raised you. I sacrificed everything for you. And now you're telling me I can't even witness your wedding?" "It's complicated," he said, but his voice was weak, like he was repeating something he'd been told rather than expressing his own feelings. "What's complicated about it? What did I do wrong? What did I do to deserve being cut out of your life?" Before he could answer, Jessica appeared beside him, looking like an avenging angel in her white dress. "Michael, what's going on? Everyone's looking for you." "I'm talking to my mother," he said, but I could see him physically diminish in her presence, like a child who'd been caught doing something wrong. "Mrs. Martinez," Jessica said, her voice sweet, but her eyes cold as ice. "I thought we'd talked about this. Today is about Michael and me starting our new life together. It's not about the past. I'm not the past," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I'm his mother. I'm his family." "You're his old family," Jessica corrected. "I'm his new family. And frankly, Your presence here is selfish and inappropriate. You're trying to make this day about you instead of about us." I looked at Michael, waiting for him to defend me, to tell his bride-to-be that she was wrong, that I had a right to be there. But he just stood there, looking miserable and conflicted, saying nothing. "Michael," I said quietly, "is this really what you want? Do you really want to cut me out of your life completely?" He opened his mouth to speak, but Jessica cut him off. What he wants is to start his marriage without drama and manipulation. What he wants is to move forward with his life, not be dragged backward by guilt and obligation. "Guilt and obligation?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "Is that what 26 years of love and sacrifice means to you? Guilt and obligation?" "That's not what I meant," Michael said quickly, but Jessica was already pulling him away. "We need to go," she said firmly. "The ceremony starts in 10 minutes, and we still need to get you positioned at the altar." "Michael, please," I called after them. "Please don't do this." But they were already walking away, Jessica's arm firmly linked through his, steering him back toward the church. I stood there in the parking lot, watching my son walk away from me, and I felt something break inside my chest that I knew would never heal. I should have left then. I should have gotten in my car and driven back to Albany and tried to figure out how to rebuild my life without my son in it. But I couldn't. I couldn't leave without seeing him get married, even if I had to watch from the outside. So I waited until everyone had gone into the church, and then I walked up to the building. The main doors were closed, but I found a side entrance that led to a small alcove where I could hear the ceremony without being seen. I stood there in my new dress, listening to my son promise to love and honor a woman who'd spent 2 years systematically destroying our relationship. I heard the minister talk about the sacred bond between husband and wife, about the importance of family and community in supporting a marriage. I heard Jessica's father give a reading about love being patient and kind. I heard Michael's voice, strong and clear, as he repeated his vows. And I cried silently, mourning not just the loss of my relationship with my son, but the loss of the future I'd imagined for us. When the ceremony ended, I slipped away before anyone could see me. I sat in my car and watched the wedding party emerge from the church, laughing and throwing rice, posing for photos on the steps. I watched Michael and Jessica climb into a decorated limousine, heading to their reception at the country club where I definitely wasn't welcome. And then, I drove home. 4 hours of highway stretched ahead of me, 4 hours to think about what had just happened and what it meant for the rest of my life. I thought about calling in sick to work the next day, about crawling into bed and staying there until the pain subsided. I thought about moving away, starting over somewhere where I wouldn't have to explain to people why my son didn't speak to me anymore. But mostly, I thought about how I'd failed. I'd failed to protect my relationship with Michael from Jessica's manipulation. I'd failed to raise a son who would stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. I'd failed to build the kind of unbreakable bond with my child that would survive any outside influence. The drive home was the longest 4 hours of my life. I stopped twice to cry in gas station parking lots, and once to throw up on the side of the road because the stress and heartbreak had made me physically ill. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex in Albany, it was nearly midnight, and I felt like I'd aged 10 years in a single day. I climbed the stairs to my second-floor apartment, my legs shaking with exhaustion and emotional overload. I hung up my wedding dress, the one I'd chosen so carefully, the one that was supposed to make me look like a proud mother of the groom. Instead, it just hung there like a costume from a play I'd never gotten to perform in. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the day. I kept thinking about the look on Michael's face when he saw me in the parking lot, the conflict and pain in his eyes. Part of me wondered if I'd seen a flicker of the son I used to know, the boy who would have never let anyone treat his mother the way Jessica had treated me. But then I remembered how quickly he'd walked away, how he'd let her pull him back to the church without fighting for me, without even trying to defend our relationship. And I realized that maybe the Michael I'd raised was already gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone who could send his own mother a text message uninviting her from his wedding. I didn't sleep that night. I kept checking my phone, hoping for a message from Michael, maybe an apology or an explanation, or just an acknowledgement that what had happened was wrong. But my phone stayed silent, and as the hours ticked by, I realized that no message was coming. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I'd been a waitress at Murphy's Diner for 15 years, and I'd never called in sick unless I was genuinely too ill to stand. But that morning, I couldn't imagine facing customers and pretending everything was fine. Couldn't imagine making small talk about the weather when my entire world had collapsed. I spent the day in my pajamas, eating ice cream for breakfast and scrolling through social media, torturing myself with photos from the wedding reception. Jessica had already posted a dozen pictures. The first dance, the cake cutting, toasts from the wedding party. Everyone looked so happy and elegant, like they were living in a fairy tale. And there was Michael, smiling and laughing, looking like the happiest man in the world. Looking like someone who didn't have a care in the world, certainly not someone who was troubled by the fact that his mother hadn't been there to witness his wedding. I stared at those photos for hours, zooming in on Michael's face, trying to find some sign that he was thinking about me, that he felt guilty, or sad, or conflicted about what had happened. But all I saw was joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy. And that hurt more than anything else, because it meant that either he was a better actor than I'd ever given him credit for, or he genuinely didn't care that I'd been excluded from the most important day of his life. Over the next few days, I kept expecting him to call. I kept thinking that once the wedding high wore off, once he had time to process what had happened, he'd realize that Jessica had gone too far. I imagined him calling to apologize, to explain that he'd been under so much pressure and stress that he hadn't been thinking clearly. I imagined him telling me that he wanted to work on rebuilding our relationship, that he missed me and wanted me to be part of his new life. But days turned into weeks, and my phone stayed silent. I went back to work, but I felt like I was sleepwalking through my shifts. My regular customers asked about the wedding, having heard me talk about it for months, and I had to smile and say it was beautiful while dying a little inside every time. "How was your son's wedding, Linda?" Mrs. Patterson asked during her usual Tuesday morning coffee in Danish. She was one of my favorite customers, a retired teacher who'd been coming to the diner for years. "It was lovely," I said, pouring her coffee with hands that barely shook. Jessica looked beautiful. "I bet you cried during the ceremony," she said with a knowing smile. "I always cry at weddings, especially when it's someone I love." I had cried during the ceremony, but not for the reasons she thought. I'd cried because I was standing outside the church, listening to my son make the biggest commitment of his life, while I hid in the shadows, like some kind of uninvited ghost. "Yes," I said simply. I cried. A month after the wedding, I was working the afternoon shift when I saw him. Michael walked into the diner, looking nervous and uncertain, like he wasn't sure he was welcome. My heart started racing, and I had to grip the edge of the counter to steady myself. He was alone, which surprised me. I'd expected Jessica to be with him, managing the conversation like she managed everything else in his life. But he was by himself, wearing jeans and a sweater I'd given him for Christmas 2 years ago, before everything went wrong. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly, sliding into a booth in my section. "Hi, honey," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "How are you?" "I'm okay. Can we talk?" I looked around the diner. It was 2 p.m, the slow time between lunch and dinner, and there were only a few customers scattered throughout the dining room. My manager, Dave, was in the back doing inventory, and the other waitress on duty was handling the other tables. "Let me get you some coffee," I said, buying myself time to think. My hands were shaking as I poured the coffee, and I had to focus on not spilling it everywhere. I sat down across from him in the booth, something I'd never done during work hours in 15 years of employment. But this felt like an emergency, like one of those moments when normal rules don't apply. "I wanted to apologize," he said, looking down at his hands wrapped around the coffee cup. "For the wedding. For the way everything happened." "Okay," I said carefully. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him how much he'd hurt me, to demand an explanation for how he could treat his own mother so cruelly. But I also knew that this might be my only chance to understand what had happened, my only opportunity to salvage something from the wreckage of our relationship. "I know you must hate me," he continued. "I know what I did was wrong. I didn't know how to handle everything. Jessica was so stressed about the wedding, and her parents were paying for everything, and there were all these expectations and pressures. So you decided to handle it by cutting me out completely." He winced. "It wasn't supposed to be like that. At first it was just about keeping the wedding small, about managing costs and logistics. But then it became about other things." "What other things?" He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with how much to say. "Jessica. She has some strong opinions about family dynamics. about how marriages work best when couples establish their independence from their parents early on. Independence, I repeated. Is that what you call refusing to let your mother attend your wedding? She said that having you there would make it harder for us to establish our own identity as a couple, that it would send the wrong message about our priorities. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. Michael, do you hear yourself? You're talking about me like I'm some kind of obstacle to your happiness, instead of the person who raised you and loved you your entire life. I know, he said, and I could see tears in his eyes. I know how it sounds, but you don't understand how difficult the whole situation became. Jessica was convinced that you didn't like her, that you were trying to come between us. I never tried to come between you. I invited you both to dinner. I tried to include her in everything. I bent over backward to make her feel welcome, but she didn't feel welcome. She felt judged and criticized, and like she could never measure up to your expectations. What expectations? I never expected anything from her except that she'd treat my son well. You expected her to be like you, he said quietly. You expected her to want family dinners every Sunday and to call you about everything, and to make you the center of her world the way I always did. His words hit me like a physical blow. So loving you too much was my crime? Caring about you too much was what made me unacceptable? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that Jessica felt like she was competing with you for my attention, and she didn't know how to handle that. So instead of talking to me about it, instead of trying to work it out, she decided to eliminate the competition. Michael was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. She said that healthy marriages require clear boundaries with parents, that couples who don't establish those boundaries early on end up having problems later. And you believed her? I didn't know what to believe. I'd never been married before. I'd never had to navigate these kinds of relationship dynamics. She seemed so confident about what was right and what was wrong. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, and I saw a stranger. Not because he'd changed physically, but because he'd allowed someone else to reshape his entire understanding of love and family and loyalty. He'd let Jessica convince him that the relationship we'd built over 26 years was somehow unhealthy, that the closeness we'd shared was actually a problem to be solved. Michael, I said carefully, do you remember when you were 7 and you broke your arm falling off your bike? Do you remember how I held you in the emergency room while you cried? How I slept in the chair next to your hospital bed even though the nurses said I could go home? He nodded, his eyes filling with tears. Do you remember when you were 16 and your father stopped sending child support, and I worked double shifts for 3 months to make sure you could still play on the baseball team and go to homecoming? Yes, he whispered. Do you remember when you were 22 and you called me crying because you thought you'd failed your job interview, and I drove to the city at midnight just to sit with you and tell you everything would be okay? Mom, please. Those aren't the actions of someone who loves you in an unhealthy way, Michael. Those are the actions of a mother who would do anything for her child. And if Jessica can't understand that, if she sees that kind of love as a threat instead of a gift, then she's not the person I thought she was. He was crying now, tears streaming down his face. I know you love me. I know you've always been there for me. But I also know that I have to make my marriage work. I have to figure out how to be a husband. And Jessica says that means making some difficult choices about priorities. Your marriage shouldn't require you to choose between your wife and your mother, Michael. A healthy marriage should have room for both. But what if it doesn't? What if Jessica really can't handle having you in our lives? What if trying to maintain a relationship with you means destroying my marriage? I stared at him, and I realized that this was the heart of the matter. Jessica had created a false choice, convinced Michael that he had to choose between his mother and his wife, and then made it clear that choosing his mother would mean losing his marriage. Then you have to decide what kind of man you want to be, I said quietly. You have to decide whether you want to be the kind of husband who abandons his family to make his wife happy, or the kind of husband who finds a way to honor both his past and his future. That's not fair, he said. You're making it sound like there's a right answer and a wrong answer. There is a right answer and a wrong answer, Michael. The right answer is that you find a way to love both of us. The wrong answer is that you let your wife manipulate you into cutting me out of your life. She's not manipulating me, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't she? Think about it, Michael. 2 years ago, you called me every Sunday. You came to family dinners. You shared your life with me. Now you're sitting here telling me that your wife can't handle having me in your life at all. How did that happen? How did we go from close to completely estranged in such a short time? He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him thinking, really thinking about what I'd said. She says that some families are just too close, that it's not healthy for adult children to be so dependent on their parents. Dependent? I laughed bitterly. Michael, you moved out when you were 18. You've been financially independent since you graduated college. You've made your own decisions about your career, your living situation, your relationships. How exactly have you been dependent on me? Emotionally dependent, he said. She says that I relied on you too much for emotional support, that it prevented me from developing other relationships. And now you rely on her for emotional support instead. How is that different? Because she's my wife. Because that's what marriage is supposed to be. I looked at him, and I saw the boy I'd raised, the one who'd been kind and thoughtful and loyal. But I also saw the man Jessica had created, the one who'd been convinced that love was a zero-sum game, that caring about his mother somehow diminished his capacity to care about his wife. Michael, I said gently, I want you to think about something. In all the years we were close, did I ever try to prevent you from dating? Did I ever try to sabotage your relationships or make you choose between me and someone else? No, he admitted. Did I ever tell you that you loved someone else too much? Or that you needed to create distance in order to be healthy? No. Then why do you think it's okay for Jessica to do those things to you? Why do you think it's acceptable for her to demand that you choose between us? He didn't answer, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. I could see him starting to question the narrative Jessica had created, starting to wonder if maybe the problem wasn't with our relationship after all. I miss you, I said softly. I miss talking to you and knowing what's happening in your life. I miss being able to celebrate your successes and support you through your challenges. I miss having a son. You still have a son, he said, his voice breaking. I'm still your son. Are you? Because it doesn't feel like it. It feels like I lost you somewhere along the way, and I don't know how to get you back. We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us crying quietly. I wanted to reach across the table and take his hand, to comfort him the way I'd done when he was small and the world seemed too big and scary, but I didn't know if I was allowed to anymore. I didn't know what the rules were in this new reality Jessica had created. I don't know how to fix this, he said finally. I don't know how to make everyone happy. You can't make everyone happy, Michael. That's not your job. Your job is to be true to yourself and to the people who love you. Your job is to figure out what's right and then do it, even when it's difficult. But what if doing what's right means losing my marriage? Then maybe your marriage isn't worth saving, I said, and I could see him flinch at the words. Michael, I'm not saying that lightly. I'm not saying it because I don't like Jessica, or because I want to break you up. I'm saying it because a marriage that requires you to abandon your family, to pretend that the first 26 years of your life don't matter, isn't a healthy marriage. She's not asking me to abandon my family, he protested. She's asking me to establish appropriate boundaries. What's appropriate about not inviting your mother to your wedding? What's appropriate about cutting off all meaningful contact with the person who raised you? What's appropriate about making me feel like I'm some kind of threat to your happiness? He didn't answer, and I knew that was because he couldn't answer. There was no way to make what Jessica had done sound reasonable or appropriate or healthy. I love you, I said finally. I love you more than you'll ever understand, and I want you to be happy, but I can't keep pretending that what's happening between us is normal or okay. I can't keep accepting crumbs of affection and gratitude while you build a life that doesn't include me. So what are you saying? I'm saying that I need you to make a choice, not between me and Jessica, but between the man you used to be and the man she's trying to turn you into. I need you to decide whether you want to be someone who honors his commitments and his history, or someone who throws away 26 years of love because it's inconvenient. That's not fair, he said again. Fair? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Michael, you uninvited me from your wedding via text message. You cut me out of the most important day of your life because your wife decided I was a problem. You let her convince you that the woman who raised you and loved you and sacrificed everything for you was somehow toxic to your relationship. And you're telling me that I'm not being fair? He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with everything I'd said. I don't know what to do, he said finally. I don't know how to fix this mess. You start by admitting that it's a mess, I said. You start by acknowledging that what happened at your wedding was wrong. that the way you've treated me for the past 2 years has been wrong. You start by taking responsibility for your choices instead of blaming them on pressure and stress and other people's expectations. Okay, he said quietly. You're right. What happened at the wedding was wrong. The way I've treated you has been wrong. I'm sorry. It was the first genuine apology I'd heard from him, and it made my heart ache with a mixture of relief and grief. Relief because maybe the son I'd raised was still in there somewhere. Grief because I realized how much damage had been done, how much trust had been broken, how much pain had been caused by his choices. I appreciate the apology, I said, but I need more than that. I need you to understand that this isn't just about hurt feelings or wounded pride. This is about the fundamental nature of our relationship. I need to know that you value me enough to fight for us, to stand up to Jessica when she tries to erase me from your life. I don't know if I can do that, he said honestly. I don't know if my marriage can survive that kind of conflict. Then you need to ask yourself whether your marriage is worth saving, I said. Because a marriage that can't survive you having a relationship with your mother is a marriage that's built on a very shaky foundation. We talked for another hour, going in circles about Jessica's motivations and Michael's obligations, and the possibility of finding some kind of middle ground. But I could tell that he was still torn, still caught between the woman who'd raised him and the woman he'd married. And I realized that nothing was going to change until he made a clear choice about what kind of man he wanted to be. When he finally left the diner, promising to call me soon, I felt emotionally drained and cautiously hopeful. It was the first real conversation we'd had in 2 years. The first time he'd acknowledged that something was wrong with the way he'd been treating me. But I also knew that talking about change and actually changing were 2 different things. Over the next few weeks, Michael did call me more often. Not every Sunday like he used to, but every couple of weeks. Our conversations were stilted and careful, like we were both afraid of saying the wrong thing and breaking the fragile peace we'd established. He'd tell me about work and ask about my health, but he never mentioned Jessica or their marriage or any of the deeper issues we'd discussed at the diner. I found out through social media that they'd gone to Europe for their honeymoon, a 3-week trip through Italy and France that looked like something out of a travel magazine. Jessica posted photos every day: romantic dinners in Rome, gondola rides in Venice, wine tasting in Tuscany. Michael looked happy in the photos, relaxed and carefree in a way I hadn't seen in years. Part of me was glad to see him happy, but another part of me couldn't help but notice that he hadn't mentioned the trip to me at all. I was finding out about his honeymoon, the same way I'd found out about his engagement, through carefully curated social media posts rather than direct communication. When they returned from their trip, Michael called me to tell me about it. He talked about the museums they'd visited and the food they'd eaten, but his enthusiasm felt forced, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me that everything was wonderful. It sounds like you had a great time, I said, when he finished his recap. We did. It was exactly what we needed after all the stress of the wedding planning. I wanted to ask him about the stress, about whether any of it had been related to the decision to uninvite me. But I didn't want to ruin the tentative progress we'd made, so I kept my questions to myself. I'm glad you're happy, I said instead, and I meant it. Despite everything that had happened, despite all the pain and betrayal and confusion, I still wanted my son to be happy. Thanks, Mom, he said, and for a moment, he sounded like the boy I'd raised. I love you. I love you too, honey, I said, and I hung up the phone feeling more hopeful than I had in months. But that hope was short-lived. The phone calls started becoming less frequent again, and when we did talk, Michael sounded increasingly distant and distracted. I could tell that Jessica was reasserting her influence, pulling him back into the isolated bubble they'd created together. Then, in December, I got another text message that made my blood run cold. Mom, I won't be able to make it for Christmas this year. Jessica and I are starting our own traditions as a married couple. I hope you understand. I stared at that message, feeling the familiar ache of rejection and exclusion. Christmas had always been our special time together, just the 2 of us since his father left. We'd developed our own traditions over the years, opening presents on Christmas Eve, making pancakes for breakfast, watching old movies in our pajamas. It was the one day of the year when the outside world didn't matter, when it was just Michael and me celebrating our little family. And now Jessica was taking that away too. I called him immediately, but he didn't answer. I left a voicemail asking him to call me back, but he didn't. I sent several text messages over the next few days, each one more desperate than the last, But his responses were brief and non-committal. "This is about more than Christmas," I finally texted him. "This is about you choosing to exclude me from your life again. I thought we'd made progress, but it feels like we're right back where we started." His response came 2 hours later. "I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm just trying to focus on my marriage right now. Focus on his marriage." As if maintaining a relationship with his mother was somehow incompatible with being a good husband. As if the two things couldn't coexist. I spent Christmas alone again, but this time it felt different. The first Christmas after the wedding, I'd been heartbroken and confused, still hoping that the situation would somehow resolve itself. But this Christmas, I was angry. I was tired of being treated like an inconvenience, tired of having my love dismissed as unhealthy or inappropriate. I was tired of watching my son become someone I didn't recognize, someone who could abandon his family without a second thought. That's when I decided to take action. I'd been passive for too long, accepting Jessica's manipulations and Michael's excuses, hoping that love would eventually win out over whatever poison she'd been whispering in his ear. But I realized that love without action is just wishful thinking, and if I wanted to save my relationship with my son, I was going to have to fight for it. I started by doing research. I spent hours online, reading about emotional manipulation and psychological abuse, about how toxic people isolate their victims from their support systems. I read about something called parental alienation, a term I'd never heard before, but that described exactly what Jessica had been doing to Michael. The more I read, the more I understood that this wasn't just about personality conflicts or different ideas about family dynamics. This was about control. Jessica had systematically worked to isolate Michael from me because she saw me as a threat to her absolute control over him. She'd started small, creating minor conflicts, and then positioning herself as the reasonable one who was trying to keep the peace. She'd gradually increased the pressure, making Michael feel like he had to choose between keeping me happy and keeping her happy. And when he'd consistently chosen her happiness over mine, she'd escalated to complete exclusion. It was a textbook case of manipulation, and I felt sick realizing how thoroughly she'd played both of us. But I also felt empowered, because understanding the game meant I could start fighting back more effectively. I decided to reach out to Michael's friends, people who'd known him before Jessica came into the picture. I called his college roommate Tom, who'd always been like a second son to me. "Linda," Tom said when he answered the phone. "How are you? I haven't talked to you in forever." "I'm okay, Tom. I was wondering if you could help me with something. Have you talked to Michael lately?" There was a pause, and I could hear the discomfort in Tom's voice. "Yeah, I've talked to him a few times. Why?" "I'm worried about him. He's been acting differently since he got married, and I'm not sure what's going on." "Look, Linda, I don't really want to get in the middle of family stuff. Please, Tom. I'm not asking you to take sides. I'm just asking if you've noticed any changes in Michael." Tom was quiet for a long moment. "Yeah," he said finally. "I've noticed some changes. He's different, more distant, and Jessica is always with him now, even when it's supposed to be just the guys hanging out." "What do you mean?" "I mean she comes to everything. Guys' nights, bachelor parties, casual dinners. She's always there, and she always has opinions about everything, and Michael just goes along with whatever she says." "That doesn't sound like the Michael we know." "No, it doesn't. The Michael I knew in college had his own opinions about things. He stood up for himself, but now he just defers to her on everything. Have you tried talking to him about it?" "I've tried, but it's like talking to a wall. He just says that marriage is about compromise, and that Jessica helps him see things from different perspectives. But it doesn't feel like compromise to me. It feels like he's just doing whatever she wants." "What about his other friends? Have they noticed anything?" "We've all noticed. We've talked about it among ourselves, but nobody knows what to do. He's an adult, you know? We can't force him to see what's happening." "But you do see what's happening?" "Yeah, I see it. And I'm sorry, Linda. I know how close you and Michael used to be. I know how much you love him." "I still love him," I said. "I just don't know how to reach him anymore." "I don't either," Tom admitted. "But I think you should keep trying. I think somewhere in there the real Michael is still fighting to get out." That conversation gave me hope, but it also confirmed my worst fears. Jessica's influence wasn't limited to our relationship. She was systematically isolating Michael from all of his meaningful connections, replacing them with her own family and friends who would reinforce her narrative about what a healthy marriage should look like. I decided to try a different approach. Instead of confronting Michael directly about Jessica's behavior, I would try to reconnect with him on neutral ground, to remind him of who he used to be before she came into his life. I started sending him photos and mementos from his childhood, things that would trigger happy memories of our time together. I sent him a picture of the two of us at his high school graduation, both of us grinning and proud. I sent him a copy of a funny story he'd written in 3rd grade about a superhero who saved the world with kindness. I sent him a recipe for his favorite chocolate chip cookies, the ones I'd taught him to make when he was 10. At first, he seemed to respond positively to these gestures. He'd text me back with smiley faces or short messages like, "Thanks for the memories." But then the responses stopped coming, and I realized that Jessica had probably put a stop to this form of communication too. I was running out of options, and I was starting to despair that I'd ever get my son back. But then something unexpected happened that changed everything. I was working the dinner shift at the diner when Jessica walked in. She was alone, which was unusual, and she looked nervous and agitated. She sat down at a table in my section, and when I approached her with a menu, she looked up at me with eyes that were red from crying. "Hi, Mrs. Martinez," she said quietly. "Can we talk?" I was so shocked that I almost dropped the menu. "Of course," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. "What's wrong?" She took a deep breath and looked down at her hands. "I know you probably hate me. I know you blame me for what happened with Michael." "I don't hate you," I said carefully, "but I am confused about why you felt the need to cut me out of my son's life." "I never meant for it to go this far," she said, and I could see tears starting to form in her eyes. "I never meant to hurt you or to damage your relationship with Michael." "Then why did you?" "Because I was scared," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was scared that I would never measure up to you, that Michael would always love you more than he loved me. Jessica, love isn't a competition. Michael loving me doesn't mean he loves you less, but it felt like it was," she said. "Every time we'd have dinner at your house, I'd watch the way you two interacted, and I'd feel like an outsider. You had all these inside jokes and shared memories, and I felt like I was intruding on something special. You weren't intruding. I was trying to include you in that specialness." "I know," she said, crying openly now. "I know you were trying to be welcoming, but my own family isn't like that. My parents are loving, but they're not close the way you and Michael were. I didn't know how to be part of that kind of relationship. So instead of learning, you decided to destroy it? I didn't plan it," she said. "It just happened gradually. I'd make little comments about how maybe it wasn't healthy for adult children to be so dependent on their parents. I'd suggest that maybe Michael needed to establish some independence, and he'd agree with me, and it felt like I was winning some kind of contest." "What kind of contest?" "The contest for Michael's loyalty, for his attention, for his love." She wiped her eyes with a napkin. "I know how sick that sounds. I know how wrong it was, but I was so insecure, so afraid of losing him, that I convinced myself that pushing you away was the only way to keep him. And now I realize that I was wrong, that pushing you away didn't make him love me more. It just made him smaller, less than the man I fell in love with." "What do you mean?" "I mean that the Michael I fell in love with was confident and kind and loyal. He was someone who stood up for the people he loved, who honored his commitments. But the Michael I'm married to now is someone who cuts his own mother out of his life because his wife is insecure, and I don't like who that makes either of us." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "Are you telling me that you regret what happened?" "I regret all of it," she said. "I regret manipulating the situation. I regret making Michael choose between us. I regret the wedding, and the Christmas exclusion, and all the little ways I've tried to erase you from his life." "Then why are you talking to me instead of him?" "Because I've tried to talk to him, and he won't listen. He's so invested in the narrative that we created together, the idea that cutting you out was necessary for our marriage to work, that he can't see how wrong it was. So what do you want from me?" "I want your help," she said. "I want to figure out how to undo the damage I've done. I want to find a way to bring you back into Michael's life without destroying my marriage in the process." I looked at this young woman sitting across from me, crying and admitting to manipulating my son and destroying our relationship, and I felt a mixture of anger and pity. Anger because of all the pain she'd caused, all the moments she'd stolen from Michael and me. Pity because I could see that she was genuinely remorseful, that she'd realized the cost of her actions and didn't know how to fix them. "Why should I trust you?" I asked. How do I know this isn't just another manipulation? Because I have nothing to gain from this, she said. Michael is happy with the way things are now. He's convinced himself that cutting you out was the right thing to do, and he's not questioning that decision. I'm the one who's having doubts, who's realizing that I married a man who's capable of abandoning his family, and wondering what that says about his character. And what does it say about your character that you're the one who convinced him to do it? It says that I'm selfish and insecure, and that I made terrible choices based on fear instead of love, she said. But I'm hoping it also says that I'm capable of recognizing my mistakes and trying to fix them. I sat there for a long moment, weighing my options. I could tell Jessica exactly what I thought of her, could let her know how much damage she'd done and how much pain she'd caused. I could refuse to help her and continue trying to reach Michael on my own. Or I could take a risk and work with the woman who'd been my enemy for 2 years, in the hopes that together we might be able to save my relationship with my son. What did you have in mind? I asked finally. I don't know, she admitted. I was hoping you might have some ideas. You know Michael better than anyone. You know what matters to him, what might get through to him. I thought about it for a moment. The problem is that he's built this whole narrative around the idea that choosing you over me was the mature, healthy thing to do. He's convinced himself that he's being a good husband by excluding me from his life. We need to help him see that the opposite is true. How do we do that? We show him what he's lost, I said. We show him what our relationship used to mean to him, and we help him understand that a good marriage should enhance his other relationships, not destroy them. Okay, but how? He won't listen to me when I try to talk about you. He just says that we've made our decision and we need to stick with it. Then we don't talk about it directly. We show him instead. Over the next hour, Jessica and I came up with a plan. It was risky, and it required Jessica to go against everything she'd been telling Michael for the past 2 years. But it was the only way we could think of to break through the wall of denial he'd built around himself. The plan was simple. Jessica would tell Michael that she'd been thinking about their relationship and had realized that she wanted to get to know his family better. She'd suggest that they invite me over for dinner, not as a grand gesture of reconciliation, but as a casual get-together where she could learn more about Michael's background and childhood. You think he'll go for it? She asked nervously. I think he wants to believe that this can work, I said. I think part of him has been hoping that you and I would eventually find a way to get along. If you present it as your idea, as something you want to do for your marriage, I think he'll be willing to try. And then what? Then we remind him of who he used to be. We tell stories about his childhood. We show him old photos. We help him remember what it felt like to be part of a family that loved him unconditionally. We show him that he doesn't have to choose between us. What if it doesn't work? What if he just gets defensive and shuts down? Then at least we'll know we tried, I said, and maybe it will plant a seed that will grow over time. Jessica called Michael that night, and I waited anxiously for her to text me with his response. When my phone finally buzzed, I held my breath as I read her message. He said yes. He seemed surprised but happy. Dinner tomorrow night at 7. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about what I would say, how I would act, what approach would be most likely to reach him. I didn't want to come on too strong and scare him away, but I also didn't want to waste this opportunity to show him what he'd been missing. The next evening, I drove to Michael and Jessica's apartment in Manhattan, my heart pounding with every mile. I'd never been to their home before, hadn't even known their address until Jessica texted it to me. As I walked up to their building, I felt like I was entering foreign territory, a world where I didn't belong. Michael answered the door, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. He seemed as nervous as I felt, uncertain about how to behave in this unprecedented situation. "Hi, Mom," he said finally, stepping aside to let me in. "Hi, honey," I said, resisting the urge to hug him. "Thank you for having me over." Their apartment was beautiful, decorated with expensive furniture and artwork that reflected Jessica's sophisticated taste, but it felt cold to me, sterile and impersonal in a way that made me miss the warmth of our old family home. "Jessica's in the kitchen," Michael said, leading me through the living room. "She's been cooking all day." I found Jessica standing at the stove, stirring something that smelled delicious. She turned when she heard us come in, and I could see the tension in her shoulders. "Mrs. Martinez," she said with a smile that looked more genuine than any I'd seen from her before. "I'm so glad you could make it." "Thank you for inviting me," I said. "And please, call me Linda." "Linda," she repeated, as if testing the name. "I hope you're hungry." I made enough food for an army. Dinner was awkward at first, all of us trying too hard to be polite and normal. But gradually, as we shared stories and memories, the atmosphere began to relax. Jessica asked me about Michael's childhood, and I found myself telling her about the time he'd tried to bake me a birthday cake when he was 8 and had accidentally used salt instead of sugar. He was so proud of that cake, I said, laughing at the memory. He decorated it with these elaborate frosting flowers, and he was so excited for me to taste it. When I took that first bite and tried not to make a face, he knew immediately that something was wrong. "What did you do?" Jessica asked, genuinely curious. "I ate the whole piece," I said, and I told him it was the most beautiful cake I'd ever seen, which was true. The fact that it tasted terrible didn't matter. What mattered was that he'd put so much love into making it for me. I looked at Michael as I told this story, and I could see the memory playing across his face. He was smiling, really smiling, for the first time since I'd arrived. "I remember that," he said softly. "I remember being so disappointed when I realized I'd ruined it." "You didn't ruin it," I said. "You made me feel more loved than any perfect cake ever could have." "That's so sweet," Jessica said, and I could hear genuine emotion in her voice. "Michael, you never told me that story." "I'd forgotten about it," he said, but I could tell he was starting to remember more than just the cake. He was starting to remember what it felt like to be part of a family where mistakes were forgiven and love was unconditional. As the evening progressed, more memories surfaced. Jessica asked about Michael's high school years, and I told her about the time he'd broken his leg during football practice, and I'd rearranged my work schedule to drive him to physical therapy 3 times a week. "Your mom gave up a lot for you," Jessica said to Michael, and I could see him processing this information as if he were hearing it for the first time. "She did," he said quietly. "She always did." "Tell me about college," Jessica said. "What was it like when Michael left for school?" "It was the hardest thing I'd ever done," I said honestly. "He was my whole world, and suddenly he was gone, but I was also so proud of him, so excited about all the opportunities he was going to have." "Did you miss him?" "Every day, but I also knew that letting him go was the most important thing I could do for him as a mother. I couldn't love him and hold him back at the same time." I saw Michael's eyes fill with tears, and I knew that my words had hit their mark. He was starting to understand that real love doesn't possess or control or demand exclusive loyalty. Real love wants what's best for the person you love, even when that means sharing them with others. "I called home every Sunday," Michael said suddenly. "For 4 years, I never missed a Sunday call. I looked forward to those calls all week," I said. "They were the highlight of my week." "Mine too," he said, and I could see him remembering what it felt like to have that connection, that consistency, that unconditional love and support. Jessica was quiet for a moment, and I could see her struggling with something. Finally, she spoke. "I need to tell you both something," she said. "I need to be honest about something I've done." Michael looked at her with concern. "What is it?" "I've been jealous of your relationship with your mother," she said, looking directly at him. "I've been jealous of how close you were, how much you loved each other, and I've done things to try to come between you, because I was afraid that there wouldn't be room for me in your life." "Jessica, what are you talking about?" "The wedding," she said, her voice shaking. "Uninviting your mother from our wedding wasn't about budget constraints or guest list limitations. It was about me being insecure and wanting to prove that I was more important to you than she was." Michael stared at her, his face pale. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I manipulated the situation. I made you feel like you had to choose between us. And when you chose me, I felt like I'd won something. But I didn't win anything. I just made you into someone who could abandon his own mother. And I don't like who that makes either of us." "I don't understand," Michael said, but I could see in his eyes that he was starting to understand all too well. "I convinced you that your relationship with your mother was unhealthy," Jessica continued. "I made you believe that cutting her out of your life was necessary for our marriage to work. But it wasn't true. It was just my insecurity talking." Michael was quiet for a long moment, processing what Jessica had said. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You're telling me that I hurt my mother for no reason? That I destroyed our relationship because you were jealous?" "I'm telling you that I was wrong," Jessica said. "I'm telling you that I'm sorry, and that I want to try to fix what I broke." Michael looked at me, and I could see the pain and guilt and confusion in his eyes. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything." "I know you are," I said softly. I know you didn't mean to hurt me, but I did hurt you. I hurt you terribly, and I let her convince me that it was the right thing to do. You were trying to be a good husband, I said. You were trying to make your marriage work. I understand that, but I was wrong, he said, tears streaming down his face. I was wrong to choose between you. I was wrong to let anyone convince me that loving you was somehow bad for me. Yes, I said simply. You were wrong, but you can still make it right. How? How do I make up for missing your birthday, for not calling you, for uninviting you from my wedding? How do I make up for all the pain I've caused? You start by understanding that love isn't a zero-sum game, I said. You start by realizing that you can love Jessica with your whole heart and still have room to love me too. You start by building a marriage that has room for both of us. I want that, he said. I want to find a way to love both of you. So do I, Jessica said. I want to learn how to be part of your family instead of trying to replace it. We talked for hours that night, working through years of pain and misunderstanding. Michael apologized over and over again, and I kept telling him that I forgave him, that I understood how difficult the situation had been for him. Jessica talked about her own insecurities and fears, and I tried to help her understand that she didn't have to compete with me for Michael's love. It wasn't easy. There were moments when old hurts surfaced, when accusations flew and tempers flared, but we kept coming back to the central truth. We all loved Michael, and we all wanted him to be happy. And slowly, we started to figure out how to make that happen. The road back wasn't smooth. There were setbacks and arguments and moments when it felt like we were making no progress at all. Michael struggled with guilt over what he'd done, and sometimes that guilt made him defensive and angry. Jessica struggled with her ongoing insecurities, and sometimes she'd slip back into old patterns of trying to control situations. But we kept working at it. We had family dinners again, awkward at first, but gradually becoming more natural. We celebrated birthdays and holidays together, creating new traditions that included all of us. We took family photos, the first ones we'd taken together in 3 years, and slowly, Michael started to become himself again. The confident, loving, loyal man I'd raised began to emerge from the shell Jessica's manipulation had created. He started standing up for himself more, making his own decisions instead of automatically deferring to Jessica's opinions. He started calling me regularly again, sharing his life with me the way he used to. It took almost a year for us to fully rebuild our relationship, and even now, 3 years later, we're still working on it. There are still moments when Jessica's insecurities surface, when she needs reassurance that she's important to Michael. There are still moments when Michael struggles with guilt over the time we lost, when he overcompensates by trying to include me in everything. But we're a family again. Not the same family we were before Jessica came into our lives, but a different kind of family, one that includes all of us. We've learned to navigate the complexities of loving someone who's married to someone else, of sharing a child with his spouse, of building relationships that honor both the past and the present. And Jessica and I have developed our own relationship, separate from Michael. We go shopping together sometimes, and we talk about things that have nothing to do with him. She's taught me about wine and introduced me to new restaurants. I've taught her how to make Michael's favorite cookies and shared stories about his childhood that help her understand who he is and where he came from. It's not perfect. We still have disagreements and misunderstandings. We still have moments when old wounds reopen and we have to work through them again. But it's real, and it's honest, and it's built on love instead of fear. The most important lesson I've learned from this experience is that love isn't about possession or control. It's about wanting what's best for the people you care about, even when that means sharing them with others. It's about being big enough to make room for other people in your loved one's life, secure enough in your own relationship to not see every other relationship as a threat. I've also learned that manipulation and emotional abuse can happen in any relationship, even ones that look perfect from the outside. Jessica wasn't a monster. She was a scared young woman who made terrible choices based on her own insecurities and fears. But the impact of those choices was devastating, and it took enormous courage and commitment from all of us to undo the damage. If you're going through something similar, if you're watching someone you love being pulled away from you by a manipulative partner, I want you to know that there is hope. It might take time, it might be painful, and it might require you to work with people you don't like or trust. But relationships can be rebuilt, families can be healed, and love can triumph over fear and manipulation. The key is to never give up on the people you love, even when they seem to have given up on you. The key is to be willing to fight for your relationships, to stand up to manipulation, to refuse to be erased from someone's life without a fight. But it's also important to fight with love, not anger, to fight with understanding, not judgment, to fight with hope, not desperation. Michael and Jessica had their second wedding anniversary last month, and this time, I was there to celebrate with them. We had dinner at a nice restaurant, and Jessica gave a toast thanking me for being part of their family. Michael held my hand and told me that he was grateful for my patience and forgiveness, that he couldn't imagine his life without me in it. And I looked around that table at the family we'd built together, the family that had been broken and rebuilt, the family that was stronger now because we'd learned to love each other despite our flaws and fears and mistakes. I thought about how close we'd come to losing each other completely, how much pain we'd caused and endured, how much work it had taken to get to this moment. But I also thought about how much it had all been worth it, how much I'd learned about love and forgiveness and the power of never giving up on the people who matter most. How much stronger our relationships had become because we'd fought for them, because we'd refused to let manipulation and fear win. If you're dealing with a similar situation in your own family, I want you to know that you're not alone. I want you to know that there are people who understand what you're going through, who know how painful it is to watch someone you love be pulled away from you by someone else's insecurities and fears. I want you to share your story in the comments below. Tell us about your own experiences with family manipulation, with toxic relationships, with the challenge of loving someone who's being controlled by someone else. Tell us about the victories and the setbacks, the moments of hope, and the moments of despair. Because these stories matter. They matter because they remind us that we're not alone in our struggles, that other people have faced similar challenges and found ways to overcome them. They matter because they give us hope that even the most damaged relationships can be healed, that even the most painful situations can be transformed through love and persistence and courage. And they matter because they remind us that family is worth fighting for, that love is worth fighting for, that the bonds between parents and children are too precious to be destroyed by anyone's insecurities or fears. So please, share your story. Tell us how you've navigated these difficult waters, or how you're still trying to figure it out. Tell us about the people you've lost and the people you've saved, about the relationships you've rebuilt and the ones you're still working on. Because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to love and be loved, to build families and relationships that nourish and sustain us. We're all just trying to figure out how to be good parents, good children, good partners, good friends. And sometimes, the only way we can do that is by learning from each other, by sharing our stories and our struggles and our triumphs. So thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this community of people who understand that love is complicated and messy and sometimes painful, but always worth fighting for. Thank you for reminding me that even in our darkest moments, we're not alone, and that there's always hope for healing and reconciliation and love. My son is coming over for dinner this Sunday. It's become our tradition again, the three of us gathering around my kitchen table, sharing a meal, and catching up on our lives. Jessica is bringing dessert, something she learned to make from a recipe she found online. Michael is bringing flowers, yellow ones because he remembers that they're my favorite, and I'll be there, cooking their favorite foods, setting the table with care, grateful for every moment we have together, grateful for the long journey that brought us back to each other, grateful for the love that survived manipulation and betrayal and years of separation, grateful for the family we've built together, the family that's stronger now, because we've learned to love each other not in spite of our flaws and fears, but because of them. Because we've learned that real love isn't about perfection or control or exclusive loyalty. Real love is about showing up, again and again, even when it's difficult, even when it hurts, even when it seems impossible. Real love is about never giving up on the people who matter most, no matter how long it takes, no matter how much it costs, no matter how many times you have to start over. And that's a lesson worth sharing, a story worth telling, a truth worth fighting for. Because in the end, love always wins. It might take time, it might be painful, it might require us to be braver and stronger and more patient than we ever thought possible. But love always wins. And that's the most important thing I want you to remember from my story. That's the message I want you to carry with you, as you navigate your own relationships, your own struggles, your own journey toward love and healing and reconciliation. Love always wins. Don't ever give up on that truth. Don't ever stop fighting for the people you love. Don't ever let anyone convince you that you're not worth fighting for, because you are. You are worth fighting for. Your relationships are worth fighting for. Your family is worth fighting for. And sometimes, the most important battles are the ones we fight with love instead of anger, with patience instead of force, with hope instead of desperation. Those are the battles that change hearts. Those are the battles that heal families. Those are the battles that prove, over and over again, that love is the most powerful force in the universe. Thank you for letting me share my story with you. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. And thank you for reminding me, every single day, that love is worth fighting for, always.